Welcome to the Thornton Review.
The show designed with you in mind. If it's important to you, it's important to us.
Ted Howard was born and raised in Escambia County and graduated from Tate High School. He received his bachelor's degree in political science from the University of West Florida, Master of Arts in International Affairs from Florida State University, and his Juris Doctor from Stetson University College of Law. He also studied in Austria and Yugoslavia while in undergraduate and graduate school. Ted's 20-year military career in the U.S. Navy and U.S. Navy Reserves includes serving as a naval intelligence officer and a deployment aboard the USS John F. Kennedy shortly after 9/11, as well as numerous other destroyers. He also served overseas in Liberia, Afghanistan, Qatar, and multiple European and Middle Eastern countries. Ted retired from the U.S. Navy Reserve as a commander in 2023. He currently works for the Navy, developing training in the fields of intelligence, cryptology, cyberspace operation, and information technology. Ted is an expert in foreign affairs, national security, and intelligence matters. He has written viewpoints for the Pensacola News Journal and has volunteered with political campaigns. He is married and has 2 sons. Hi, I'm Pueschel Schneier, Executive Producer and Manager of the Thornton Review. Thank you for tuning in. With President Trump about to take the White House again, I wanted to do a comparison of the 2016 Trump administration and the 2020 Biden administration on economic, foreign, and border policy, and what we can expect with having President Trump back in the office. So what better person to do this comparison with would be Edwin Howard. Ted is a retired naval intelligence officer who has spent countless hours at the Pentagon. He had his own office there, and is an expert on foreign affairs, national security, and intelligence. So Ted, it's great to have you on the show again. Please introduce yourself.
Sure. So my name is Ted Howard. I was born and raised here in Escambia County, went to UWF, FSU for grad school, and then Stetson University College of Law. So kind of made my way across the Florida Peninsula educationally, and joined the Reserve back in '93 when I was in college, and got commissioned in '99. So I did about 29 years active in the Reserve, and I retired from that back in '23. Bulk of my time was as a naval intelligence officer, so both active in the Reserve there. And yes, I did. I pulled some time at the Pentagon too. I guess I had an office I shared with a lot of other people, which was interesting. But I got a really unique perspective on how national security decisions are made. And so I did some other assignments up in the Washington, D.C. area as well, multiple assignments overseas, and deployments at sea, deployments in the Middle East, Afghanistan, and Liberia as a peacekeeper. So, and being from here, when my wife and I decided to settle down, this is our home, so this is where we settled. So
I'm glad you did.
So I'm glad
to be friends with both of you and to know your children.
Absolutely. Thank you for what you're doing, and thanks for the generous introduction.
Absolutely. Well, it's all true. It's factual.
It's been fun.
So thank you for that. We're going to take a commercial break, and when we come back, we'll begin our discussion with Ted on the U.S. border. There is no government-funded program that can guide a man's thoughts. Only God can do that. Alpha Fence Company can install any type of fence. When you call and mention the Thornton Review, you'll receive a $100 discount on your fence. They also offer military discounts. Vinyl fence, wood fence, aluminum fence, chain link fence. If it has the word fence, Alpha Fence Company can do it. 850-695-9526. 850-695-9526.
9526.
Thank you for tuning in. We're going to begin our discussion with Ted Howard, who is a retired Naval Intelligence Officer, on policies comparing the Trump administration to the Biden administration and what to expect with the new Trump administration again. So can you just tell us an overall view or an overall perspective that you know, like say for border policy? What is the major difference between the Trump administration in 2016 to 2020 and the Biden administration from 2020 to 2024? Oh, and by the way, I saw something online, I don't know if it's true or not, but somebody was videotaping all of these flatbed 18-wheelers carrying pieces of the border wall that the Biden administration is selling as scrap metal. Do you know anything about that?
Ooh, wow. Well, like you said, I've seen bits and pieces in the media here and there. So I just want to say, first of all, standard disclaimer, everything I say is my own personal opinion, personal observation. I'm no longer in the military. And so...
Well, that makes it even better.
Because
you can talk freely.
It's interesting because I think what you just said really highlights the problem, is that where do you go for factual data to craft a decision or an assessment? Yeah, it's always the first thing I think about, like in intelligence, when something happens. It's like, okay, well, we got this information, right? These data that we've acquired somehow, and okay, got it. Now, how reliable is that source? I mean, how do we know that we're not being told something to deceive us or to, deception targets your bias. And so how do I know that I'm being told factual information? And we live in a media environment where if you have a certain predilection, you can go find something that will confirm that. You have confirmation bias. And so I got to thinking about that. Now, like I said, I haven't seen, I saw like a bit pieces, but I wouldn't be surprised one bit that they're auctioning off or trying to dispose of pieces of the border wall. And there could be reasons for that. I mean, there could be very innocuous reasons. I'm not trying to defend the Biden administration or anything, but there could be reasons that it's surplus or that it's expired or that it just no longer fits with the overall scheme of where things are going.
That makes sense. But okay, so that is the case.
Absolutely.
I'm curious what they're doing with the money, like how much are they selling it for and what they're doing with the money. And I know you don't have those answers, but that's a question that if we did find out for a fact, if we wanted to investigate it, I would like to investigate it further and know where the money's going. Right. That's just my thinking.
Absolutely. Well, I think that would probably go back into U.S. coffers, which is what it should do. I mean, I think that, that's a great thing. I think something I thought about, I think it's the Center for Strategic International Studies, CSIS, or it may be the American Bar Association's National Security Law section. I think it's CSIS. They have what's called Civics as a National Security Concern. I think it's CSIS. And so what they do is it's a series of programs they have, and they'll bring on high-ranking government officials, Supreme Court justices, people like that, and they'll talk about why we need to understand civics. And something that was interesting, I remember one time I was watching it, and someone made a point about when we have people serving in the administration, and it's in an acting capacity that has not gone through the standard Senate confirmation process, that what you really have, you've bypassed a type of oversight the Constitution provides. And so there is going to be oversight. There should be oversight through Congress, through the House or the Senate.
We need those checks and balances.
And then the other thing I would offer to you as well is if people know that there's a fraud being perpetrated against the government, there's the False Claims Act, and that's a Civil War era law, I think 1862, to prevent people gouging the Union Army. And so there are a number of judicial and legislative mechanisms out there for people to use. You get groups like, was it Judicial Watch? They do wonderful work as well to find out. So, I mean, those things are, I mention that because those are places people can go and either have a primary source, like a government source, or they can have somebody committed to being a watchdog to actually talk about these things. And so, as far as the border wall, I don't know specifically what's going to happen to those materials, but I would offer to you, and this is just my observation, the border problems we have they are the crescendo of a problem we've had for decades. And so back in 1964, 65.
Well, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I want
Absolutely.
I don't want to break your train of thought,
Yeah.
but it seems like the Biden administration and possibly the Obama administration before Trump was encouraging illegal immigrants to come in.
Right.
They were actually encouraging them, welcoming them, hoping that they come in, and wanting them to come in. Most people don't want gangs.
Right.
If you're bringing people in, we want them vetted. We want to know where they're coming from and why they're coming here. We don't want them on welfare, and we don't want to give them handouts. But that was just my observation. It seemed more as if they were encouraging it rather than it just being a problem on its own that they're trying to solve. But go ahead.
Well, no, and it's interesting too because as I understand it, if people look at this holistically, and I hate to use holistically, but we live in an age of mass human migration.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of the largest migrations of humanity since the end of World War II. And so the United States is we don't have a monopoly on these problems. I mean, other countries, especially in Europe, have these problems. Mm-hmm. And so that's something we need to understand, that we're not alone. There's nothing, But the other thing is that what you had under the Biden administration was the actual, as I understand it, the highest it's gone down somewhat in the past 6 months or so, but we had a peak of illegal immigration into the United States. Before that, it was actually a little higher, I think, in the earlier parts of the Bush administration, around 2006. Maybe I'm wrong there, but so you actually had peaks before,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of times what happens is because of some type of crisis out, people are going to flee. And so
From their own country because there's a crisis.
Oh, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the other thing is what happened with the Biden administration was when the Biden administration came in, they got trapped by their rhetoric. They had their rhetoric of this is, the family separation policy is inhumane. Okay, well, yes, that sounds inhumane, but peel it back a little bit more and you find out that, okay, it's not like these children were just put in cages or something like that. They were to be placed with a family member. But there is a certain degree of there's something callous about that. It's something that it offends people. So there's that piece. The other thing they came out and said was there was Title 42. And Title 42, if I recall, is was a public health related to COVID, that the president could basically restrict an influx into the United States and send people back. And so that was done during COVID. And so
under Trump.
Yes, ma'am. And so then the Biden administration, they tried to to stop it. Mm-hmm. And then there was some court cases back and forth, and eventually, I'm not sure which court, maybe even the Supreme Court or Court of Appeals, actually said that Biden had the authority to no longer employ Title 42 because it was executed because of the COVID pandemic. And once COVID was a thing of the past, well, there's no reason to have Title 42 in action. And so then the other thing would be remain in Mexico. And so the Biden administration there tried to, the Trump administration, everybody has to remain in Mexico before he or she can enter the United States based on an asylum claim. And so that was a Trump policy. Biden said, I'm not going to do that anymore. And so I think that too has been discarded. So you have Title 42, you have remain in Mexico, and those are the big drivers. And so there was that, and then also, once again, that's government action. Mm-hmm. But then you have rhetoric around it. And this is something I think, and you watch Fox News, you watch CNBC, MSNBC or something like that, you're going to get a perspective there. You're going to see, obviously, the fact that you have people struggling at the border. That's a terrible. I've seen refugees up close and personal.
Yes, it's not a happy
It's
scene.
never,
It's not a happy sight.
no,
It's sad.
And I've never seen a happy refugee.
But they put themselves in a situation by coming over here.
Well, to some extent, I would offer to you, if you really want to solve, there are many reasons, and I'm optimistic that President Trump will address. You have to understand. The Vice President Kamala Harris. She goes, I'm going to address the root causes of illegal immigration.
Yeah.
Well, no, she didn't, because drivers are the fact that you have gangs, and you have a socialist government that's very repressive in Venezuela. You have repression and violence in Nicaragua. You have criminal gangs in Colombia and other places like that, and that's driving people to flee. and people are hungry, people are scared. People will flee for their lives. They don't care about the law. The other thing is that people are there's some dislocation because of climate, droughts or crop failures, things of that nature, and then war. But the drivers, there's this driver of Title 42 and Remain in Mexico that the Biden administration did away with. They stopped building the wall. But the last thing is that what we really need, what I think Americans would bring them a lot of peace, is if we began to seriously and critically examine the rhetoric around these things. Because the rhetoric distorts the facts. So the rhetoric, you hear that all these people are gang members. Well, yeah, there are a lot of gangs.
Or you hear about children in cages, and it's just so sad, and they're crying out for their mother, and the mother's nowhere to be seen.
And some of that could be true. But
would the child, would they be any better off where they were?
Right. I mean, yes.
I mean it's a humanitarian problem, what's going on in those countries.
Right.
But we need to focus on America
Right.
and the people who are struggling here. We need to look at our own citizens, our own people. We need to be America first.
So,
that's my opinion.
absolutely.
We need to be America first. We need to focus on America, and we need to secure our borders and prevent those gangs and disease and whatever's coming through. It's in our Constitution. It's in our preamble to secure our borders.
Right. So I would offer to you, there's a saying, I think it was Rahm Emanuel, never waste a crisis, because you can get things accomplished in a crisis you can't do otherwise. And any savvy politician will always take advantage of a crisis. And so when you have politicians, they go to the border and they pound their chest about whatever. But, on the right, you would have, say, somebody like President Trump talking about MS-13 and others, which got it. Those are facts.
Yeah.
But not everybody. Okay,
Sure.
there are other reasons people come to the United States.
But they're coming over illegally.
That's true.
And I know a ton of people who came over legally. They jumped through the hoops. They went through the process. It was long, but they did it, and now they're citizens, and they're voting, and they're working. They're members. They're Americans. They still have an accent, but they are Americans.
Right. And we are a nation. The rule of law is the rule of law.
Yeah.
That's one thing that sets this country apart from many other countries, and I think one of the reasons we're so successful is we believe in the rule of law. And so the fact that people are doing things illegally, so that's something that I totally support that. Then you have people on the left who go there and cry at the border or whatever, and then as soon as the cameras stop, they dry up.
Well, bleeding hearts see that, and they're like, oh, we have to help them, we have to let them in. But they're looking at one perspective. Of course, if you see a crying child or a crying mother or a crying person, it doesn't matter who it is, you want to help them. I mean, your heart goes out and you want to help them.
Right.
But are they any better off here than they were?
Well, it's hard to.
I don't want to harp on.
Oh no! But I would offer to you that that goes back to the if we really are serious, and one thing I think about when I think about President Trump is I believe clarity of American leadership. When America says we will do something, we do it. When we say this is a red line, we enforce it. Whether I think even President Trump's critics respect that about him. And so what we've had, I think, is you have these problems in places like Central and South America, and there's been an absence of will to address those problems.
Because they do not have their country first agenda.
Yeah,
The government apparently doesn't. People are miserable there. That's why they want to come here. So it seems like, as far as for a foreign policy perspective from a presidential administration, they would be trying to get in touch with the country leaders where these people are coming from and try to help from within.
I think that's something you've already seen. With President Trump threatening Canada and Mexico with tariffs, which there are some legal authorities he can employ, and you need to tighten up the border there.
Yes.
Because you're sending your problems here, or you're allowing problems to pass through your countries into my country.
Exactly.
But let me just circle back really quick, because there's something I would offer to you. The sound policy. Let's try to keep politics out of sound policy, because I remember I overheard one time somebody was talking about. There's this dream that we're going to turn, the Democrats were like, we're going to turn Texas purple. And there's this idea of you want to create, you want a certain degree of, people with problems and people with whom you can create some relationships and identities. And then it's like, okay, hey, we're the party that, gave you asylum. We're
So
the party.
hey, let the illegal immigrants vote.
And
it
so that's
turns into a completely
right.
political thing.
And so what it does is it
And
winds
at the
up.
same time, it's diluting our country and it's ruining our country.
Well, I would offer to you a few things about that. These things have happened in the past, but this is not a problem we can't fix.
Right.
And I think that we tend to think that this walls and barriers and things like that do work to some extent very well in some places. But even the most secure walls can fail. I mean, the Israelis had this extraordinary wall around Gaza, and it failed on October 7th, 23. And so,
wow.
Oh,
so they breached the wall?
in Gaza, yes, Hamas breached the wall.
Okay.
And so
I know what happened.
Right.
I know what the story is, but I didn't realize
But
that it
there
started at the wall.
There were border controls in Gaza
Wow.
and checkpoints. And
They must have been let in.
well,
Just simply let in.
that's a.
I think that was an inside job.
Talk for days about that one because but border walls, there's a place for that. There are places for those kind of controls. Even the Obama administration built border walls. But I think really what I'm optimistic about, or at least my hope, and hope is never a plan, but with the Trump administration is that you're going to see clarity of U.S. leadership and clarity of U.S. position. Not just, telling other countries, hey, fix this or resolve that, or putting in place things that enable solutions. I mean, you got people like Maduro. Maduro is a bad man. Now, is he are we going to invade? No. That's not our vital interest, but are there other ways we need to, in a regional context,
get through to him,
right? Stop.
To
implement
something to prevent people from coming out.
I mean, you have these gangs, you have them bringing in fentanyl and things of that nature. You have the Chinese.
They need to get in charge of their own countries.
Right, but the United States needs to have real consequences for those who fail. And the thing I think with the Biden administration is you've seen an absence of any kind of accountability or consequences. And naturally, these people are going to export their problems and export their mischief. And so that's the first thing. But let's also understand this is a human tragedy because you have these people are fleeing persecution, they're fleeing starvation, they're fleeing violence, they're fleeing. They're coming to this country in some ways for the reasons that many of our ancestors probably came here. They
need to be vetted,
right.
and they need to come over legally.
Absolutely.
If they're coming over for the reasons our ancestors came.
And that's the second.
I'm all for people coming over here.
Oh, absolutely. I think,
as long as they are productive members of society.
And that's the second problem.
And they are not breaking the law.
And so
that's fine.
we
welcome them.
I think domestically. And once again, I'm optimistic. I would hope that President Trump would put his attention to this. What's how many employers exploit this cheap illegal labor? I mean,
right.
The Center for American Progress, which is a liberal think tank, I mean, they've done some work on this, and they have a point that there's exploitation. This is exploitation of other human beings because these people don't, probably are not on the books. They're probably not paying certain taxes. They're probably not paying insurance on them. They're probably not complying with certain types of OSHA requirements, whatever. And so this is now. Where's the punishment for U.S. employers who are doing this? And that these people, people will go where the money is, and so that part bothers me. But the other thing is that we have not had any type of immigration reform since I guess the 80s, and really major immigration reform since the early 1960s. And so yes, you do have these people. There are people who do come here illegally, and we are a nation of laws. But then again, we're also a nation where we have to understand that immigrants bring a lot with them, but it has to be through illegal means.
Right.
And that's the problem. I think the perception is, and I do agree with it, that we have lost control of our borders. And if
giving them cars or giving them driver's licenses, putting them up in hotels, using taxpayer money to cater to illegals is a political stunt that needs to stop. We shouldn't be putting up with political stunts.
Politics doesn't make good policy all the time.
No.
And I think that's the problem.
Well, they're breaking their own laws. They're breaking America's laws.
And so I think it's a tragedy because if you don't control your borders, you're no longer a sovereign state.
Exactly.
And but then again,
I think
also,
that's what they want.
and I think when you build inducements into the system that bring people here, that's wrong. And then the other thing is, though, do we punish the domestic causes? Do we punish the people who exploit them? Do we punish Do we punish the criminals who are bringing them here? And
well, yeah, punish the criminals for sure,
right.
but the people that are putting them to work, at least they're working.
Well,
you know?
yes,
At least they're working.
and they are. But I will say this: it's interesting because I was thinking about that. The last big immigration law was Hart-Celler, and that's where the United States, back in the '60s, we did away with racial categories, and
Right.
things like family reunification and certain types of skills, things of that nature were high priority. That was struggled to be bipartisan, and this was 50 years ago, more than 50 years ago. But there seems to be absolutely no courage in Washington to say, let's sit down and actually solve our immigration. If you need to hold people to a standard, you must have a clear standard.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And there's no clear standard.
No clear standard.
I know if I'm a I think they call them coyotes. If I'm a human smuggler,
Because I think that their actual standard is to bring them in and to just erase the borders, just have a world,
Well, I think that there are people who have an interest in this is a way to make money. This is a way to achieve a political end. But then again,
to get votes.
and then there are also people. And we talk about votes, and I don't think this does us any favor. I mean, I'm a Republican as well. It does not create the conditions for a solution when we try to say all these people are X. There are many different reasons people are coming here. Okay, yes, they are criminals.
Yeah, vet them.
But vet them. But they're also
the ones that are coming here for legitimate reasons, who want to get a job and who want to raise a family,
Absolutely.
and who want to assimilate
Absolutely.
into our society, give them the papers and let them come over legally.
right. But I think that's what I would hope. And
But they have to be vetted.
But
We need thousands and thousands of people. We need a department, and we need workers, and we need people vetting.
Well, that's the problem. We have a system that is old and cumbersome, and there's a lack of the law has to be constant to be effective, and you have these different executive orders, and you have this very haphazard approach, and so I actually did some pro bono immigration work many years ago, and I remember how many of these people I talked with. They came here illegally, and we were putting together packages for them to take to a court or something, and they worked the whole time.
Right.
And I served in the military with people who's like the children
Or
of.
maybe they need to be told how to come over legally.
Right,
Maybe we need a department that can help people do that.
Well, and the other thing, I was in the military with people who, their parents or whatever they came here, they are the children of illegal immigrants.
Right.
And so
then is that the Dreamers Act?
the DACA, deferred arrivals or deferred. That's separate altogether. But once again, everything is couched in a highly politicized environment, and it's not looked at. Okay, what happened here? Why is this happening? There are reasons overseas or domestically and foreign that need to be addressed, and we have not had any kind of clear leadership that will take one and fix it, or just that piece. And also to have a government that's unified in its approach.
Yeah.
And
So I want to touch on foreign policy
Yes,
with Ukraine and Israel, and I want to touch on economic policy between Trump and Biden. We're going to take a commercial break.
Absolutely.
We could talk about the border for a whole
Ever.
series. Yeah.
Yes.
But I want to remind our viewers that the Thornton Review is a civic engagement show with a purpose to spread awareness by interviewing local elected officials, candidates, and professional leaders. This is information you won't get anywhere else. We're going to take a commercial break, and when we come back, we'll continue our discussion with Ted Howard on a comparison of policy from the Trump administration to the Biden administration. There is no government-funded program that can guide a man's thoughts. Only God can do that. Alpha Fence Company can install any type of fence. When you call and mention the Thornton Review, you'll receive a $100 discount on your fence. They also offer military discounts. Vinyl fence, wood fence, aluminum fence, chain link fence. If it has the word fence, Alpha Fence Company can do it. 850-695-9526. 850-695-9526. You can watch the Thornton Review on our website, thethorntonreview.com, our Facebook page, The Thornton Review Show, YouTube, Vimeo, and WBQP television stations 12.1 and 12.8. Thank you for tuning in. We're going to continue our discussion with Ted Howard, retired Naval Intelligence Officer, on foreign policy and economics. We're comparing the Trump administration and the Biden administration and what to expect with the incoming Trump administration. So I think we've covered the border, and we could probably cover it even further.
Absolutely.
And we could solve all the problems right here in the studio.
I hope.
But I also wanted to touch on Israel, Ukraine, and the economy. So would you like to start with foreign policy on
Absolutely.
Israel and Ukraine? So the Trump administration supported Israel. Did the Biden administration support Israel? Or did they support them in a different context, a different way? They gave support in a different way? What are some of the comparisons?
It depends. I mean, it depends on how you say to support. And, sometimes where you sit determines where you stand, right? So I would offer to you, if somebody, this is an observation, the Israelis have prosecuted a war in Gaza, which, they obviously had the right to do, to pursue Hamas and just dismantle and destroy Hamas.
Mm-hmm.
And
absolutely. I mean, they have a God-given right to protect their citizens from that ever happening again and to punish the ones who did it.
If you look
absolutely.
So the level of, the fact that I've been impressed with what the Israelis have done as far as, their ability to, I'm surprised, sadly, I don't like to talk about, it's kind of tough, because you're talking about human lives here.
Mm-hmm.
There have been very few comparatively speaking, in such a dense urban environment, the IDF has lost a lot of people, obviously, but I'm surprised they haven't lost more. But then again, they're using a lot of drones, they're using a lot of really good intelligence assets, precision strike, and they've trained for this and prepared for it. The part that I think that for Mr. Biden, the problem that he would have, and the criticism that history will put on him, especially from the left, will be the fact that there have been what people would probably say, this is just, once again, where you sit determines where you stand. There have been excesses. There have been, I think the number is well over 45,000 Palestinians killed. And in an insurgency like they have in Gaza, that percentage of innocent women, children, men, non-combatants is going to be very high. And so there has been a great deal of civilian suffering. The fact that, there's...
But whose fault is that?
Right.
Well,
obviously...
We can't control what their government did to another government.
Well, correct.
Well, to citizens.
Well, it's Hamas's. Obviously, it's Hamas's.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But Hamas, once again, filled a vacuum. Okay? Hamas, it's interesting to study places like Israel or Gaza, places like that, because Americans have this is just Ted, but I really do. We look at the world and we say, why everybody's like we are. Well, America, we have, what's that?
Very different culture.
Very different culture.
Very different form of government.
So groups like Hamas and Hezbollah fill gaps and voids. And so Hamas means Islamic Resistance Movement, but it's also an acronym which means zeal. And it provides social
That
services.
doesn't sound good.
Social services, religious services, education, healthcare in some respects. Hezbollah does the same thing. And they're also political movements. And they also have a very violent, very violent and pretty savage, very savage in my opinion, a very savage military wing. And so I think that if we don't, or if the Israelis don't, if we don't fix those gaps in governance, today it's Hamas. Well, back in the early 1960s it was Fatah, and then before that it was somebody else. These things grow from a gap in governance, and so
It seems like every time they wipe one out, a worse one rises up.
do you Ehud Barak was the prime minister of Israel. He's also one of Israel's most decorated soldiers. He was asked one time, if you were born a Palestinian, what would you be? And he said, a terrorist. And he didn't mean that in a mocking way. He meant,
That's what they are.
Well,
that's what he saw them as.
something I realized later in my time in the military was that I got it. We have to kill people. We have to fight. I kill a guy, right? Let's say we blow a place up, we kill somebody, okay? This is just, I'm talking like abstract here, okay? I'm not talking like direct actions or anything like that, but we kill somebody. Well, he has children. If you're a little boy, what do you grow up and become?
A hater of the person that killed your dad.
A terrorist.
Yeah.
Or if you grow up to want vengeance. And then you have to have something that will close those gaps and bring about some type of, reconciliation, coexistence, or something of that nature. And so I know that there are elements within the Netanyahu government that just want to go ahead and expel all the Palestinians and to go ahead and settle that with Jewish settlers. That I would offer to you. I think the Israelis tried that, and they had to abandon that approach back in early 2000s when they had to evacuate Gaza. So, has the Biden administration supported Israel? Well, arms flows keep going. The rhetoric has been very subdued, but you can look at from just an outside in saying, yeah, they've supported Israel. But the problem is that the harder left that supports Biden, and the fact the rhetoric that's come out of there and on the college campuses and places like that I don't think is productive. I think that needs to be tamped down because this.
Would October 7th have happened if President Trump was still the president?
That's a tough hypothetical.
It
Because
is.
I'll tell you, this is just my opinion, okay? Back in 1973, okay, and there was the 67 War. There's a great book called 6 Days of War by Michael Oren. It discusses the 6 Day War in 67. So the Israelis had this lightning war, and they defeat Egypt, Syria, Jordan. They capture the Golan. They capture Gaza. They capture the West Bank.
Wow.
They did a lightning war.
What year was this?
1967, June of 67.
Ah.
So the Israelis, they began, after the 67 war, the Israelis were postured to fight quick wars. When you're a small country like Israel, you're outnumbered, 30-1. Your economy can't necessarily sustain prolonged combat. Most of your soldiers are reservists.
Right.
It has to be quick and done, right? And so what happened was the Israelis got into what's called the War of Attrition with Egypt. And I want to say that lasted from 69 to 70. Might be wrong there. But it was this prolonged kind of medium, kind of a lukewarm conflict along the Sinai area. There were some shootings, lots of fighting and things of that nature. There were raids. It kind of wore the Israelis down. And so they built this series of fortifications called the Bar-Lev Line along the Suez. A wall.
A wall, yeah.
And it was guarded. It had whatever sensors, for that time. And it kind of became just another assignment. And they put a lot of faith in the fact that, hey, we defeated the Egyptians and the Syrians and Jordanians, but definitely the Egyptians and Syrians so badly they're not going to fight us for another 10 years. That Moshe Dayan actually gave a speech in which he said that. He was the defense minister at the time. What they failed to understand was that, people learn and people look for holes. And what really struck me about what happened on October 7th, 2023 was the fact that so much of it just seemed to repeat that failure from 1973. The fact that, the Israelis had been tested. They thought they had their handle, and sadly, I think, if you ask people on September 10th, 2001, do we understand Al-Qaeda? I think back in those days, I remember being in the military at the time, oh yeah, we got a handle on it. Well, we found it the hard way. And so these things have a tendency to surprise you. Would it have happened? I don't know. It depends on what would have been the red lines the president would have put down. And also...
Yeah, and what would he have done in response?
Well,
the response would have been completely different.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing is, you tell Hamas, don't do this. Okay, got it. Well, but Hamas, you have to tell Hamas's backers. You tell the Iranians, don't do this.
If this happens, this is going to happen.
Yeah, the Israelis will take care of Hamas, I'll take care of you. And it's something I think that the Iranians, they're crazy, but they're not stupid.
It was just a strange event, that October 7th. It was very shocking. It was human atrocities. It was war crimes that we've never seen before. Maybe, I'm sure we've seen worse, but not in my lifetime. And to go to civilians' homes and drag out teenagers and grandmas and do what they did is just is an atrocity. But I think it was also very political. And do you think that Netanyahu knew that it was going to happen by any chance? Or did he think that it could happen and like you said, there was a hole there somewhere? Was it planned? Did he know it was going to happen?
Yeah, I'm not privy.
Was it a reason for him to go in and invade?
I'm like I said, I'm not privy to what he has in front of him.
Right.
And the Israelis. Sometimes this is an interesting thing because when it comes to intelligence work, there's always a mystique. Mossad is rock solid. The CIA is incredible. MI6 is flawless. And history teaches us that, well, you know what? MI6, they were penetrated by the KGB way back in the 1950s. Actually, in the 30s. The CIA was penetrated by the KGB. The KGB was penetrated by, whatever. And so I think that, sometimes you can fall in love with your own capabilities and believe your own propaganda. And so that's one piece. But the other thing is that I think with Netanyahu, there's this idea that he wanted to maintain a certain level of disorder. Because he didn't want Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, he didn't want to see a Palestinian state. And if you look at it from the Israeli perspective, you have people just right down the road who want to, Hamas in their charter, the charter of Hamas specifically calls for the destruction of Israel. They refuse to accept Israel's right to existence. And
So we need to keep them out.
Right. Golda Meir gave us. She said to him one time, I think it was a 60 Minutes interview. She said, the Arabs or whomever. She goes, they say they want peace. And
well, you can't believe them.
Well, she said something, but they also want you dead.
Right.
And she said, you just can't die a little.
You're an infidel because you're not part of their religion.
Well,
and the religion tells them to kill the infidel. And
so I think what happens with Hamas and Hezbollah, I think you've seen significant attrition for Hezbollah. The Israelis really, I'm surprised at how they have just defamed. It seems like they've defamed them significantly. And that's one of the reasons Syria fell so quickly. But the other thing is with Hamas, did Netanyahu know? I don't know. Netanyahu may have fallen in love with his own. Even in '73, the Israelis they called it the concept, and he may have fallen in love with his concept. And I think that eventually we'll find out. But the problem we have, and I think with Trump, I think with Biden, has he supported them? Well, yeah. If you look at it from a very neutral and detached perspective, yes. Politically or in say rhetoric, and rhetoric matters. Has he? And I don't think Mr. Biden is very strong. I think he's definitely got some significant capacities, but I don't think he's done enough to tell people, listen, the stuff it's doing on the campuses. There's this. Higher education has lost face in a sad way, and they've earned the shame they have. But with Trump, I think he would have seen pressure on Iran. Don't back these guys up. But the other thing is this: something that there's this idea now. I've read about in multiple media sources, is that Sinwar, the leader of Hamas in Gaza, who's been dead for a little bit now, he expected, hey, everybody's going to rise up and help, right? It's going to cause a pan-Arab, other Arab countries and other groups are going to come to my aid. That did not materialize.
Right.
And so, but I think that, definitely that's where having clear American leadership.
And somebody who knows about their religion and about their culture, and who can create policy, foreign policy with them, because you can't do anything with them if you don't know their culture and if you don't know the way they think. And I think that a lot of people have the psychological mindset that if you treat somebody the way you want them to act, they will act that way. And to a certain extent, that is true, but not with Islam.
Well, I don't, the religious piece, Islam is more than just, there are like 5 major types of Islamic.
Right.
It's
a lot deeper than I even know.
And it does, and you have different clerics, and you have different sects of Islam, and you can talk for days about that. But I would offer to you this, is there's studying history is always a good thing, because there's this statement, this story one time, in the Victorian era, a British diplomat, an older one asked a younger one, like, how do I, reason, or how do I interact with people in that region? And he said, listen, you'll never understand what's in the back of their minds, but I'll make sure they understand what's in the back of your mind.
But can I understand it though?
Well, but here's the thing I'd offer to you, that in foreign policy, do we really understand how the Russians live? Well, I lived with a Russian in college, in grad school. Yeah. You can study it, you can speak the language or whatever, but you have to they must clearly understand these are the consequences.
Exactly.
And this is we will enforce this, because at the end of the day, rhetoric, carrots, whatever, people don't listen to that. People understand consequences.
Exactly.
And so I think that's something you would see with the Trump administration. You see definite consequences. Like what happened with Qasem Soleimani, I remember that very well.
We're going to have to do another show.
Oh, yes, ma'am.
But I want to touch on Ukraine.
Absolutely.
So it seems like Biden is back in Ukraine.
Absolutely.
And I believe under Trump it wouldn't have happened to begin with. They may have dissolved their conflict without having to go to war. So what's the conflict all about? Somebody has nuclear nukes on a border somewhere?
Well,
Ukraine has nukes on the border?
No, ma'am. So actually, I think if you look at it from the initial, if you want the big reason we're in Ukraine, or we are assisting Ukrainians, is it goes back to nukes. Because after the Cold War, 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed, on Kazakhstan, was it Kazakhstan? Belarus, Ukraine, and Russia, there were nuclear weapons from the Soviet stockpiles and Soviet arsenals were there. And so U.S. policy and for much of the West, we wanted to, let's make sure just one country controls those weapons. Okay, you don't want nukes running around everywhere. And we want to keep that genie in the bottle. And so Ukraine, I think Belarus, maybe Kazakhstan. But Ukraine signed the Budapest Memorandum, I think it was in 1995, late 94, like December 94 or early 95. And it basically said, hey, we guarantee your territorial integrity. We guarantee your security. In return, all this nuclear material, these weapons, the infrastructure, that will go to Russia. And then we had Nunn-Lugar was a law that was passed, and that assisted the Russians in disposing of much of that. Okay. So we wanted to push it out, centralize it, and then dismantle it as well as we could. So the Budapest Memorandum, if you want to protect yourself from a foreign power, have nukes. Has the United States ever attacked a nuclear country? Never.
No.
And I think that's, and countries will tell you that that protects you.
Oh, okay.
So, And
So their thinking is we need nukes.
Well,
that's probably why Iran is thinking we need nukes.
well,
because
I think there are
it's
some other reasons that Iran probably want nukes too. But I would offer to you that
not just for protection.
well, there's a certain status that comes with that. But what we have, Ukraine gave up its nukes, and then we agreed. The United States,
Ukraine gave up their nukes.
Right.
Okay.
the United States and Great Britain, and even Russia said, "Okay, we got this." Now there are always loopholes and everything, right? And so it's like, hey, the Russians will say yes, but Ukraine is operating in an offensive way because, NATO is moving this way, even though the United States and others said NATO would not expand.
Right.
That could talk for days about that, but I would offer to you the reasons Russia has gone into Ukraine was, they saw what happened with, Yanukovych is removed.
Yes.
They saw how easily they could take things over in 2014 when they seized Crimea. There was pretty much a nice.
They seized Georgia.
Right, they fought Georgia.
2008.
And so you have Georgia.
So they're just expanding.
And so it's like, listen, the West has not stopped us. And the other thing is Ukraine, the government's weak. We're just going to walk in there and it'll. Well, and the other thing, this is something a lot of people don't necessarily know, is that when Putin was being advised about Ukraine, when you talk to Russians about foreign policy, they refer to it, the Russian word for it is like, I'm going to butcher this, is like Violetica Politica, external policy. Not foreign, external. So when you talk to Russians, they talk about two types. There's the near abroad and the far abroad. The near abroad is everything that belonged to the Soviet Union, like Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Belarus, the stands down by Afghanistan. And then you talk to the far abroad, and that's everything outside of that. So when Putin was being advised, it wasn't Russian foreign intelligence that was advising him, it was Russian domestic intelligence. And the Russian domestic, and you have there's a culture within Russia called the Silovik. And so these people advised him, that they're just going to collapse. But I don't think that. But the reasons we're in Ukraine right now are just.
Wow, that was bad advice.
It was bad advice, absolutely. But then again, it's a culture where there's you don't disagree with the boss. But
so it's not just a disagreement between Ukraine and Russia. It's Russia thinks that Ukraine is rightfully theirs.
Well, absolutely,
because of history.
And it means like borderland, right? And so.
So I guess you'd have to know the cultural difference and the political and the environmental, governmental differences. Because I don't know what the difference is to be under a Ukraine government or a Russian government. I don't know what would be worse. I mean, do they have food? Do they have jobs? Are they living happily? Do they have the right to freedom and happiness under Putin?
Well,
do they have it in Ukraine?
Yeah, and I would offer to people, if they're interested, read George Kennan's The Sources of Soviet Conduct, because he talks about Russia has to expand. But if you want brass tacks, 10% of the world's grain, 16% of the world's corn, or vice versa, Ukraine. Minerals.
So, I mean, that could stay the same. Right. It would just be Russia. It would just be another part of Russia.
If
I don't know what the big deal is, but that's just me.
Yeah, because the Russians, and then there's strategic minerals there, like what we use for microchips, I call it gallium. Okay. So the Russians, there's a desire for Russia to maintain for great power status. And also Russia wants to control. You want to control your borderlands. You want to control that. So.
So if Ukraine has a crumbling government and stable leadership in government, then of course Russia's going to say that's rightfully my place, and now's the time to take it.
And they failed.
Exactly.
And the first time they got lethal aid, Ukrainians got lethal aid, was the Javelin missile, and that was given to them by President Trump. So it wasn't Biden.
Given to who? Ukraine?
Ukrainians. Trump gave them the weapons they've been using to kill Russians and significantly destroy the Russian military. So I think there would have been great pause in the Kremlin had Trump been in office.
Right. Yeah, is it better for the world to be a lot of small countries around Russia, or is it better for the world, for Russia to be a giant country? I guess that's something that any leader would have to weigh. Right. So we're going to have to do another show
Oh, yes, ma'am. Sorry.
We didn't get to economy.
Oh no! Let me talk so much. I'm so sorry.
It's not your fault. Because I just enjoy the conversation, and I could just talk about the border all day for an entire series, and I could talk about. I'd love to hear you talk about Israel and Ukraine for an entire series. So you have to have me back on.
So thank you again.
More often.
I appreciate the patience and forbearance of your viewers.
Absolutely. So do you want to say anything closing that we missed on the border or on Ukraine?
I wish people understood how they have more power than they think they do.
I wish you understood
that people have more power
than
than
they think they do. The question is, do they use it the right way?
Well, there are media out there, go to these primary sources. When you see a Supreme Court decision you don't like, go to the Supreme Court's website, pull the decision. Go to the GAO's website, go to the Department of Defense websites or the Inspector General for Ukraine, and get the facts, because I think what we're being given through media is drastically distorted.
It's just political.
And it makes people angry.
They want to sway you a certain way. They want to sway you to a certain belief.
They want to influence you, not inform you.
Exactly.
And I think if there's one thing we Americans need to understand, I think we're all beginning to learn now, is that, don't look to Washington, D.C. for solutions. Those solutions begin right here.
That's why I like doing the Thornton Review.
Yes, ma'am.
Because it's not just opinion-based.
Yeah.
I invited you on to give us facts, because you've been there, you've seen it, you've studied it, you've analyzed it, you've worked on it, you've actually made your livelihood on knowing this information. So I really appreciate you, and
Thanks.
There should be an office for you somewhere in DC to put you in charge of a department of anything, and the world would be a better place.
You're very kind, and thank you again for having me on. I appreciate the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. The Thornton Review is on the air to provide public service awareness and intellectual infrastructure to our community. This show was made possible by Ida Gates, Godly Teas, LLC, Alpha Fence Company, and our guest, Ted Howard. It was great having you on.
Thank you again.
And we want to thank you for watching this episode of the Thornton Review. Bye-bye.
And cut.